The FAA-H-8083-32, our book in the section on props, talks about feathering and unfeathering. And we've talked several times about feathering. We looked at the Hamilton Standard Hydromatic, and we also looked at the Hartzell feathering propellers and Macaulay, and they use latch pins. And on pages 7-17, the FAA starts talking about in their book about unfeathering. So let's look at the different methods to unfeather, and some of these are related to feathering as well. They say that there are three basic methods. One is talks about just when you start the engine. This is like the small light twins do this, the Hartzell props. Start the engine, and the prop governor will pump oil back, and it will unfeather the engine on its own, just with the propeller oil. Another way to do it, let's jump down to number 3. Number 3 says that some systems provide an unfeathering pump, and we saw this in the Hamilton Standard Hydromatic. If you watch the videos that we did on that, and there's a YouTube video that we showed during the Zoom meetings that shows this unfeathering pump, and that is one way to do it. Now, the middle one, number 2, is to provide an accumulator. And so what you can do is you can pump this. If you pump up hydraulic pressure, you can store pressure in the accumulator. Oil will run in there, and the accumulator will balance, as we learned in hydraulics. So if we apply, say, 1,000 psi to the oil system, that accumulator bladder will move, and it will let the accumulator fill up with oil. And when we lose oil pressure, when the oil pressure goes down from the engine, that oil that's inside will now push out as the bladder pushes it. We got a higher pressure on the nitrogen side than we do on the oil side. So an accumulator is a way to store oil and pressure that can be used to unfeather the engine. The last quick thing I want to talk about is towards the end of our book, the FAA talks about the auto feathering system. Now, what an auto feathering system does, imagine that you're coming in to land an airplane and the engine quits and the propeller is out there in a low pitch, and that is a ton of drag. And in fact, there's been some crashes where that happened. B-17 historic bomber that was owned by the Collier Foundation had something similar to that happen, to where they had an engine failure on landing, and it caused so much drag that the airplane stalled and crashed. Well, what an auto feather system will do is if the engine quits, it will take that propeller, it will sense that the engine has failed, and it will put that engine into feather so that the propeller is streamlined and the pilot can land the airplane and he's not overcome with lots and lots of drag. The system uses a solenoid valve to dump oil pressure to the propeller cylinder. If the torques, they use torque sensor switches, and that's what senses the loss of RPM, is the torque sensor switches, and that will allow oil to go and to feather the engine.